mentor to President Biden. In a statement, Mr. Biden said, in part, Mondale defined the vice presidency as a full partnership and helped provide a model for my service. NBC's Chris Clackham has a look back at his life.
I'd like to introduce to you Senator Walter Mondale.
A Minnesota progressive who brought a new standard to the vice presidency, Walter Fritz Mondale catapulted to the national political spotlight in the 1970s and 80s. Born in a small southern Minnesota town in 1928, Mondale grew up the son of a Methodist minister and became involved in politics at a young age, eventually serving as a protege to the liberal lion Hubert Humphrey. After Humphrey was tapped to be vice president to Lyndon Johnson in 1964, Mondale was appointed to succeed him and went on to earn the respect of his colleagues as a substantive senator. Jimmy Carter then turned to him to be his running mate for his successful 1976 presidential bid. But Mondale wasn't willing to settle for the ceremonial office the vice presidency had long been. Instead, he demanded an office in the West Wing of the White House and would advise Carter on major issues, help select cabinet officers, and participate in briefings. An overall change to the vice presidency that has been emulated ever since. After Carter's loss for re-election to Ronald Reagan in 1980, Mondale overcame a crowded Democratic field to win the party's presidential nomination in 1984. He made history by selecting Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro as his vice presidential running mate, the first woman to join a major party ticket. But the Mondale-Ferraro campaign faced an uphill fight against the popular, charismatic Reagan. Mondale suffered a crushing defeat on Election Day, only winning his home state of Minnesota and Washington, D.C. Not lost in defeat, though, was Mondale's standing as a respected leader and policymaker. In 1993, President Bill Clinton named him ambassador to Japan. In his later life, Mondale remained a powerful influence in the Minnesota Democratic Party and taught at the University of Minnesota, where the law school's hockey club is still known as the Fighting Mondales in his honor. Chris Clackham, NBC News.
Let's turn now to the unseasonably cold temperatures that are popping up in many areas this morning. Here's NBC meteorologist Janessa Webb with more on that. Janessa, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. No way I should be talking about the single digits for the upper Midwest, high plains, and it will continue for this afternoon, where wind chills are currently at 5 degrees, the feel-like temperature for Wyoming. And as you make your way into the Midwest, we are talking about the lower 30s, upper 20s in some location. Now, a widespread of winter weather alerts along with freeze alerts that are in place for 51 million people, and they're starting to make their way now into the Tennessee Valley. That's a look at the big weather story of the day. Here's a closer look at your day ahead. So the cold is in place, and that's going to allow for some more snowfall for Wyoming this morning, and then a little bit of sunshine by this afternoon. You can see the well-defined cold front makes its way across the Ohio Valley. We're in the 60s for Cleveland. Another component is snow. We'll talk about that coming up.
Of course it is, because it always is, seems like every day these past few weeks. Okay, Janessa, thank you.
Patrick Marleau skated his way into the NHL record books 24 years in the making. With his appearance against the Vegas Golden Knights, the Sharks center played in his 1,768th career game, passing the legendary Gordie Howe for the most games played in a career. Marleau, who made his debut in 1997 for the Sharks, broke a record that was set 41 years ago.
Leading the news, the manhunt for the former sheriff's deputy accused of killing 3 people in Austin, Texas has ended. Police say they arrested 41-year-old Stephen Broderick on Monday without incident. Authorities say they found him about 20 miles from the scene on Sunday's shooting, walking down a rural road with his loaded pistol in his waistband. He has been charged with capital murder in the shooting deaths of his ex-wife, adopted daughter, and her boyfriend. Prosecutors say he resigned from the force last year after being arrested on charges of sexual assault of a child.
A Colorado judge has agreed to resign after being censured by the state's Supreme Court for racist behavior. Judge Natalie Chase, who is white, was a judge in the state's 18th Judicial District. She agreed to step down after disciplinary proceedings against her for racist behavior, workplace misconduct, and name-calling toward a fellow judge. Judge Chase acknowledged repeatedly using the N-word in conversations with 2 court employees, one of whom was black. Her resignation will take effect on May 31st.
2 leaders from the far-right extremist group, the Proud Boys, are ordered to be jailed while awaiting trial on charges related to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Joseph Biggs and Ethan Nordine had been free since their March 10th indictment, but a Trump-appointed U.S. district judge deemed the pair too dangerous and ruled they be detained.
The official trailer for Shang-Chi and the Legend of 10 Rings was just released. Chinese-Canadian actor Simu Liu geared up for his lead role as Marvel's first Chinese superhero on a journey against his evil father, the Mandarin. The movie will hit theaters on September 3rd.
And when governments around Europe told people to create a bubble around themselves to limit social contact, this man took it quite literally and cut off from COVID and the world. Look at this Belgian artist. He strolled through the capital, Brussels, wearing a portable oasis he created, which is a plexiglass mini green that rests right on his shoulders. The 61-year-old thought of the idea 15 years ago and finally put that concept to use. It's kind of like a human training.
They were like, all right, weirdo forever. He's like, all right, we'll see who have the last laugh. You know, if there's ever a global pandemic, got myself covered.
He had it planned, years in the making.
There it is, and he put it into action. Wonder what he does afterwards.
Good morning, everyone. You know, we do have winter weather alerts that are still in place for the plains. It's just a small section of the country, and all eyes are really focused on the Midwest to the Northeast, where we're going to watch a potential 3 to 5 inches across Northeast Ohio into northern New England.
In today's top stories, the D.C. medical examiner says Capitol Hill police officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes the day after the violent siege on the Capitol. According to the medical examiner, Officer Sicknick suffered 2 strokes caused by a clot in an artery. Video obtained by the New York Times shows him being attacked during the riot. 2 men are accused of blasting Sicknick with a powerful chemical irritant. Prosecutors have not linked that exposure to Sicknick's death.
A memorial gate honoring the slain soldier Vanessa Guillen was unveiled in Fort Hood, Texas. The Army specialist was killed last year. The gate contains a plaque commemorating Guillen with her photo. It leads to the 3rd Cavalry Regiment, where she served. Her death became a catalyst, changing the way the Army responds to sexual assault and harassment.
Federal investigators are looking into the deadly crash of a Tesla car in Spring, Texas, outside of Houston, reportedly with no one at the wheel. NBC's Sam Brock has the details.
A fiery crash at the hands of no apparent driver, sparking questions about how this Tesla veered off the road Saturday and barreled into a tree, killing the 2 men inside.
There was no victims inside of the front driver's seat. There was someone in the front passenger seat, and a victim was in the back seat of the vehicle.
Fire crews needed 30,000 gallons of water to extinguish flames from the vehicle.
Those lithium batteries kept reigniting.
Unfolding in a Houston suburb, it's just the latest incident involving Tesla and possible use of their autopilot technology, which the company notes requires active driver supervision. No response from Tesla, though founder Elon Musk tweeting hours before the crash, Tesla with autopilot engaged, now approaching 10 times lower chance of accident than average vehicle. The federal government is investigating more than 24 Tesla incidents, including a driver in Boston reportedly asleep at the wheel.
So I did a double take. This guy was just head between his legs, completely asleep.
Now 2 agencies sending investigators to try and unravel another tragedy. Sam Brock, NBC News.
And last night on Twitter, Elon Musk said data logs so far show autopilot was not able and that the car did not have the full self-driving feature. He's been very defensive of these situations in the past, but we see just, his net worth falling $6 billion after this incident. So.
Yeah, but as revolutionary as having the option for autopilot is, it doesn't mean your brain can go on autopilot. You have to be aware of what's going on when you're behind the wheel.
Thanks for starting our Tuesday with us. I'm Francis Rivera.
And I'm Philip Mena. One more thing before we go. We want you to check out this annual rite of spring in the Swiss Alps. They set a figure of a snowman on fire. It's to signal how much longer winter will last. The faster the head explodes, the sooner spring will arrive. Not quite scientific, but entertaining.
You're watching NBC News Now.
For many in this community, this is not new.
I know plenty of Asian Americans who feel very unsafe today.
We're getting past the point of being okay with just a post, with just a statement. We want action.
She planned for the end of the world. Death followed in her wake, and her children went missing. Mommy Doomsday, the Dateline podcast.
It has to be heard to be believed.
Listen to all episodes now.
Get more of everything you love about today, now all day.
Woo!
Talk with friends all day.
Oh, man.
Feel good stories.
Kiss the bride.
All day. Chef secrets all day.
Salute.
Now, there's more today to love.
Welcome to Today All Day.
Get more extended interviews.
That's impressive, Chance.
More solutions.
Does it have to say antibacterial?
More must-see moments all day. So join us today, all day. Stream for free on today.com and Peacock.
Need your true crime fix on the go? Dateline episodes are available as podcasts. Mysteries with a twist from the True Crime Original.
Wow.
Listen to Dateline wherever you get your podcasts.
Right now on NBC News Now.
Here in Chicago, about 20,000 middle schoolers returning to school today.
They also took advantage of existing vaccine distribution networks throughout Alaska.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
Are we vaccinating right now to keep ahead of these mutant strains?
We still have a demand that far exceeds supply.
He's the first African-American crew member on an extended mission on the International Space Station.
To be able to see someone that looks like them, that is super important.
Perhaps the most successful gospel artist today.
Where you're going is a lot bigger than where you've been.
I am looking forward to seeing you in Tokyo.
Thank you Today Show family. Love you guys.
Love you back.
Members of the jury, the case is in your hands as judges of the facts. I am certain that you realize that this case is important and serious and therefore deserves your careful consideration.
Testimony of 45 witnesses and closing arguments to consider. And now the sequestered jurors will resume deliberations in the trial of Derek Chauvin later this morning.
Cities from coast to coast are bracing for reaction to the decision over George Floyd's death as the nation remains on edge.
Former President Trump delivers some sharp comments on the GOP and Pfizer in his first on-camera interview since leaving office.
Can you guess what the most diverse cities in America are today? Here's a hint. The top two are not New York or LA.
And a bobcat attacks a woman in her driveway as her husband comes to the rescue in the most bizarre story. An amazing video of the day. Early Today starts right now. Glad you're with us on this Tuesday morning. I'm Francis Rivera.
And I'm Philip Mena. The nation bracing for a verdict as both sides in the most closely watched police brutality trial in recent memory finished their closing arguments. The fate of former officer Derek Chauvin is now in the hands of a jury. Hundreds of teenagers streamed out of schools in Minnesota as students walked out of classrooms in protest of racial injustice. And with so many vocal voices during this trial, the words of one congresswoman could impact the verdict.
I am very hopeful, and I hope that we're going to get a verdict that is say guilty, guilty, guilty. And if we don't, we cannot go away. We got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational.
Chauvin's lawyer arguing it was potential grounds for an appeal, and the judge agreed. Our Jay Gray takes us inside the closing arguments.
Violence. He did what he did on purpose, and it killed George Floyd.
Prosecutors labeling Derek Chauvin's actions the day George Floyd died an abuse of power, an assault, a betrayal of his badge.
You can see this with your own eyes. You could see what happened, that he couldn't breathe. He said he couldn't breathe.
Telling jurors they don't need to look much further than the video of Floyd's dying moments to understand this case.
For 9 minutes and 29 seconds, he begged, George Floyd begged until he could speak no more.
9 minutes, 29 seconds. It's not the proper analysis, because the 9 minutes and 29 seconds ignores the previous 16 minutes and 59 seconds.
A struggle defense attorney Eric Nelson says framed the events in Chauvin's actions that day. The former Minneapolis police officer removing his mask, facing the jury, as Nelson highlights Floyd's health issues, use of drugs, and the gathering crowd as factors in Floyd's death, telling the panel Chauvin never violated police policy.
These are the actions of a reasonable police officer.
Reasonable is as reasonable does. And here what you saw wasn't reasonable, and you didn't get the whole truth.
In their rebuttal, the final word with the jury, prosecutors call the defense's statements a, quote, story.
So there aren't two sides to the story as to the unreasonable use of force. And when Mr. Floyd is saying, please, please, I can't breathe, 27 times in just a few minutes.
Closing with an image at the core of their case, Derek Chauvin's knee across George Floyd's neck. Jay Gray, NBC News, Minneapolis.
Meanwhile, across the country, cities are preparing for potential unrest ahead of the verdict. Our Ron Allen is following that part of the story for us.
Your voice matters.
Tension and anxiety across the nation in anticipation of a verdict, especially near the memorial to George Floyd.
I am hopeful. It's scary that it only takes one juror.
I don't have a ton of hope.
Thousands of National Guard troops and police on duty. One team attacked Sunday morning, authorities say, by a drive-by shooter. 2 guards slightly injured. Minneapolis hoping to avoid a repeat of the violence that followed Floyd's death. Over $350 million in damage. A police station destroyed.
Last night!
Daunte Wright! Nearby, the nightly protest over the killing of Daunte Wright by a now former police officer, fueling the tension. More than 270 arrests last week. Hundreds of high school students briefly walked out of class. A show of solidarity with Wright. Over the weekend, outrage across the country. Protests from Portland to Charleston.
How many kids have you killed today?
And in Chicago, because of the killing of 13-year-old Adam Toledo by a police officer there last month. Some cities even boarding up, anticipating more trouble. Now, all eyes on Minneapolis. Do you think he will be found guilty of something?
He has to be. So I don't have much faith in this system. However, I am optimistic.
And our thanks to Ron Allen for that report.
Breaking news overnight, former Vice President Walter Mondale has died at the age of 93. A champion of progressive causes, Mondale helped define the modern Democratic Party, first as a senator and then as vice president, serving under President Jimmy Carter. Mr. Carter paid tribute to Mondale last night, calling him the best vice president in our country's history. President Biden remembered his lifelong friend in a statement, saying in part, Mondale defined the vice presidency as a full partnership and helped provide a model for my service. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has a look back at his life.
Walter Mondale changed the face of American politics, shattering the glass ceiling by picking Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate in 1984.
I picked someone who I thought would make a superb vice president, or if necessary, a president.
When Mondale, nicknamed Fritz, ran for president, he'd been in Democratic politics for nearly 3 decades, including 12 years in the Senate and 4 as Jimmy Carter's vice president. In the primaries, Mondale battled Colorado Senator Gary Hart, who ran on New Ideas. In a debate, Mondale fought back with a fast food chain's ad slogan.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef?
The fall campaign against President Ronald Reagan was an uphill fight, challenging a popular incumbent at a time of peace and prosperity.
Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you, I just did.
It was intended as candor, but was seen as a blunder. Mondale got a glimmer of hope when Reagan's age became an issue. In a debate, Reagan buried those doubts and Mondale's hopes.
I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Mondale lost in a historic landslide.
All of those states colored in blue are Ronald Reagan states.
He won only his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Though only in his 50s, Mondale became a party elder, serving as U.S. ambassador to Japan. But in 2002, Mondale replaced Minnesota Democratic Senator Paul Wellstone on the ballot after Wellstone was killed in a plane crash just 11 days before Election Day. He narrowly lost his last hurrah. Mondale's wife of 59 years, Joan, died in 2014. They had 2 sons and a daughter who died of brain cancer in 2011. Walter Fritz Mondale once said he loved public life and always looked for ways to serve. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News.
Let's turn now to the latest in the fight against COVID-19. According to the CDC, more than 132 million Americans have gotten at least 1 vaccine dose, and over 85 million are fully vaccinated. But there are growing concerns about how many people are still hesitant to get the shot. Here's NBC's Miguel Almaguer.
As states across the country allow all Americans 16 and over to be vaccinated, in many regions appointments are open, lines have vanished, and vaccine hesitancy remains a problem. With half of all adults in the U.S. having received at least 1 shot, vaccinating the other half may not happen as quickly.
This was the light at the end of the tunnel. The acceptance is not as broad as what we hoped it would be.
With experts expecting Johnson & Johnson's vaccine to return to use in some form, perhaps as early as Friday, the U.S. is planning to maintain 3 million vaccinations a day, as even the president,
so please, get the vaccine,
joins the chorus of voices making the case vaccines are safe and up to 90% effective.
What we say to anyone who has doubts about getting a vaccine, we leave it up to you. Look at the data. The data speak for themselves.
As new COVID cases increased 27% compared to last month, the U.S. State Department will boost its do not travel advisory to 80% of countries worldwide, citing unprecedented risk from the pandemic.
And just as testing slows across the country, pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS are offering at-home COVID tests for about $25. Giving you results in 15 minutes.
For many, testing and vaccinations have never been so accessible. The question now, will Americans follow through? Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
Former President Trump is stepping back into the political spotlight, giving his first on-camera interview since leaving office. For more, let's get to our Capitol Hill correspondent, Tracy Potts. Tracy, true to form, he had plenty to say.
He did have a lot to say. This was a wide-ranging interview from his Mar-a-Lago resort down in Florida. Most former presidents, out of respect for the office, don't have a lot to say about their successors. Not in this case. Trump attacked President Biden for how he handled migrants at the southern border. And he was also candid about his own party weighing in on the future of the GOP and whether he might run again in 2024.
Should this now be the Republican Party agenda? Should anybody that wants to run for the House or the Senate, should they take this Make America Great agenda and fight for those things that you fought for the 4 years you were president?
If they want to win, yes. We've expanded the Republican Party. You've seen, I mean, the Texas border, we have the biggest Hispanic vote since, as the governor said to me, he called me up, great governor. He said, since Reconstruction. I said, you're talking about Civil War, right? He said, since Civil War. If you want to win and win big, you have to do that.
Are you running again in 2024?
I say this, I am looking at it very seriously, beyond seriously. From a legal standpoint, I don't want to really talk about it yet. It's a little too soon.
Now, as for the pandemic, Trump encouraged Americans to get vaccinated, and he slammed the FDA for its decision on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, saying from a PR standpoint, it had a devastating impact. Back to you, Philip.
All right, Tracy Potts for us, the latest on former President Trump's comments. Thanks, Tracy.
Let's turn now to those cold temps hitting much of the U.S. this morning. Here's NBC meteorologist Janessa Webb, who's tracking this frigid weather. Hi, Janessa. Good morning.
Good morning, man. It's like a winter feel across the upper Midwest. We are talking about wind chills in the single digits for Wyoming, upper 20s to lower 30s in sections of the Midwest. And unfortunately, it expands all the way down to the southern plains. So Dallas, even Oklahoma City, and you can see most of the Midwest getting in on these freeze alerts. We currently have 51 million people under some kind of alert this morning. And then we have that snowfall that's going to be right behind it. But temperatures are about 10 to 25 degrees below average. That's a look at the big weather story of the day. Here's a closer look at your day ahead. So the chill, it's going to continue all afternoon. This morning, watch a little bit of snowfall, but then sunshine returns for the Midwest into the upper Midwest as well. Lots of sunshine for New York City all the way to Philadelphia, upper 60s. Everybody's wondering about how much snow we'll see. We'll talk about that coming up.
Of course you're talking about snow. I was hoping it would just be cold, but snow's still there.
Pretty surreal.
All right, it was a night of highs and lows for one Nationals fan at the ballpark. In the third inning, the fan flubs a home run ball that comes right at him, but he has a chance at redemption 2 innings later. Well, this stinger comes right at him, and he does not miss the opportunity, as you'll see right now, coming away with a souvenir in that moment of triumph. So totally safe face right there.
What are the odds?
Leading the news, ex-NYPD officer and now disbarred lawyer Gustavio Villa has been sentenced to 51 months in prison for stealing $900,000 in 9/11 victim compensation money. The funds were owed to John Ferreira, a fellow NYPD officer. He was diagnosed with cancer after working at Ground Zero for months after the September 11th attacks. Villa had been lying to Ferreira for more than 3 years about the cash.
Well, let's turn now to Europe, where an announcement sent shockwaves throughout the world of soccer. A plan for a breakaway Super League made up of the 12 of the wealthiest teams has been met with outrage from many fans, athletes, and even world leaders. NBC's Chapman Bell joins us now from London. Chapman, good morning. So tell us more about the reaction you're seeing there. I'm assuming it's very, very strong.
Philip, yeah, very strong reaction, and it's not proving to be a very popular idea here, as you said, with fans, players, even world leaders and some others that I'll get to in a second. Basically, what is this? This is a proposal to bring together, well, so far, 12 of the wealthiest teams across Italy, Spain, and England into a league to compete. Now, this would not be a qualification type event, but one in which they would be permanent members. They expect to have 15 permanent members and then 5 that could qualify for it. Now, this goes against the current Champions League, where everyone must qualify for it, and it brings in teams all across Europe. So far, teams in Germany and in other countries have refused, including France. President Macron very happy with that. Now, we've also seen Prince William getting involved in this. He's president of the FA here, the Football Association, the governing body, and he says that I share the concerns of fans about the proposed Super League and the damage it risks causing to the game we love. So, like I said, not very popular. Boris Johnson says he will do everything he can do to stop these teams in England joining this league, which fans and players say is all about making money.
That threatens the competition for the most popular game in the world, even if not everyone yet is on board over on this side. All right, Chapman, thank you. The official trailer for Shang-Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings was just released. Chinese-Canadian actor Simu Liu geared up for his lead role as Marvel's first Chinese superhero on a journey against his evil father, the Mandarin. The movie will hit theaters on September 3rd.
And when governments around Europe told people to create a bubble around themselves to limit social contact, this man took it quite literally and cut off from COVID and the world. Look at this Belgian artist. He strolled through the capital, Brussels, wearing a portable oasis he created, which is a plexiglass mini green that rests right on his shoulders. The 61-year-old thought of the idea 15 years ago and finally put that concept to use. It's kind of like a human training him.
They were like, all right, weirdo forever. He's like, all right, we'll see who have the last laugh. You know, if there's ever a global pandemic, got myself covered.
He had it planned, you know, years in the making.
There it is, and he put it into action. Wonder what he does afterwards.
Good morning, everyone. Winter blasts across the Rockies seeping down to the deep south today. Daytime highs, they're below average.
In today's top stories, a pastor in Washington, D.C. has found himself on the wrong side of the law. And now he's facing 20 years in prison after federal prosecutors charged him in a Paycheck Protection Program fraud scam. 45-year-old Rudolph Brooks Jr., the pastor of Kingdom Tabernacle, allegedly made fraudulent applications to the program for $3.5 million. Authorities say he used that money to buy 39 used automobiles, including a 2018 Tesla, among other personal purchases.
Looking for somewhere diverse to live with lots of culture? A Wallet Hub study has revealed 2021's most diverse cities in America. Houston, Texas was crowned most diverse, with Jersey City, New Jersey falling in second. Neighboring New York City came in third, while Dallas and Los Angeles rounded out the top 5. As far as the least diverse city, the study found that to be Provo, Utah.
I have to say, I've lived in 3 out of those 5 there. It's just better. You know, the more the diverse city is, the better everything is. Just adds to the richness of it. All right, now to a shocking security video that shows a bobcat attacking a woman in North Carolina in her own driveway. After hearing her scream, her husband came to the rescue. Ollie Cosgrove from our Wilmington, North Carolina affiliate WECT has the story.
Happy and Christy Wade leaving their house to take their senior cat, Caroline Faith, to the vet. When Christy came out of their garage, she heard a growl.
I knew it was a cat because I know what a cat sounds like, but it sounded like a very angry cat.
So when Christy backs up to see what it is,
the face of this bobcat came around the corner of the car.
Christy tried to run between the cars to the street.
Bit my hand, and I kind of drug it with me, and it crawled up my back.
Christy's husband, Happy, heard the screams and immediately knew something was hurting his wife. He came running around the car.
I just remember seeing this face, and it was trying to bite her right there in the side of the neck. And so I shoved my arm in, and that's why I ended up with it like this. I'm holding this thing up, and at that point I say, oh my God, it's a bobcat. I really didn't know what it was.
Happy says as soon as he saw it was a bobcat, he knew something had to be wrong with the animal.
I knew that it had to have had something, and so I figured it was rabies.
The cat bit Happy 3 times while he was holding it.
And I could literally feel the tooth on my knuckle.
So he tried to get it as far away from him and his wife as he could.
I thought, I'll throw it this way, 2 options. One, it'll see an escape route and it'll take off, or it'll stop just a moment where I can get a good shot at it.
Well, he eventually shot that bobcat, which tested positive for rabies.
Something else. Thanks for waking up with us. I'm Francis Rivera.
I'm Philip Mena. Have a good one.
This was an authorized use of force, as unattractive as it may be. And this is reasonable doubt.
George Floyd's final words on May 25, 2020 were, "Please, I can't breathe."
In just a few hours, the jury will continue deliberating the charges against former police officer Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd, as the nation remains on edge.
Breaking overnight news of the death of former Vice President Walter Mondale as tributes pour in from around the nation.
A 21st century Wright brothers moment, this time on Mars. It's early today on this Tuesday, April 20th.
Good morning. I'm Francis Rivera.
And I'm Philip Mena. Bracing for a verdict, a jury of Derek Chauvin's peers are now deciding his fate after both sides finished their closing arguments yesterday.
What the defendant did was not policing. What the defendant did was an assault.
You have to be convinced that the defendant's actions caused the death of Mr. Floyd.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. The reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
The words of California Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters could impact this verdict after she urged protesters this weekend to get confrontational if Chauvin is not convicted. Chauvin's lawyers argued that it was potential grounds for an appeal, and the judge agreed. Meanwhile, students in Minnesota walked out of schools in protest of racial injustice. Our Megan Fitzgerald is on the ground for us in Minneapolis.
Philip, good morning. Shortly after closing arguments ended and jurors started deliberating, hundreds of people filled the streets here in Minneapolis protesting. They are calling for justice. So we asked them, what does that mean to you? And they say they want to see Derek Chauvin sentenced. They want to see him convicted. A lot of personal reasons for why people came here. But I can tell you, we've talked to people who have come here from all over the country. I want you to listen to what they had to say.
There's a certain level of trauma that you get when you see people being killed because of the color of skin that they share with you. Because when you're out there, you don't know the next time that, you get pulled over by the police, and that may be your last breath.
Now, throughout the protests, we have been hearing the names of not just George Floyd, but Sandra Bland, Dante Wright, all of the other people who have been killed at the hands of law enforcement. Again, these protesters here are calling for justice, an end to systemic racism, calling for police reform, and they say that they're going to continue to be out here throughout deliberations. Philip?
Pivotal and consequential verdict ahead. Megan, thank you.
Let's turn now to the latest in the massive push to get COVID vaccines in more arms. According to the CDC, more than 85 million Americans are now fully vaccinated, but there are still some out there who are hesitant to get the shot. Here's NBC's Alice Barr.
In every state and every corner of the country, every American 16 and up is eligible for a COVID vaccine. The CDC says half have already received at least one dose. Now the Biden administration is launching a full court press to convince the rest to roll up their sleeves.
You need to be protected, and you need in turn to protect your neighbors and your family. So please, get the vaccine.
The push across social media and airwaves comes amid rising cases and hospitalizations and uncertainty over the fate of the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine, on pause while investigators look for a link to a handful of rare blood clots. Health officials say it's taken a toll on vaccine confidence.
Everybody left, they canceled their appointments.
After an initial 6 reports of blood clots out of more than 7 million J&J shots, the CDC and FDA are now reviewing a small number of additional reported side effects.
These have been a handful of cases, not an overwhelming number of cases.
A decision is expected on Friday about whether it's safe to start using J&J again.
I doubt very seriously if they just cancel it. There will likely be some sort of warning or restriction or risk assessment.
The far more commonly used Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have not been linked to serious side effects, and health officials say there's more than enough supply to vaccinate every American by July. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Walgreens is investigating after some people in North Carolina got doses of saline instead of the vaccine. The pharmacy says a limited number of patients were impacted by the mix-up, and they all got the actual COVID vaccine as soon as they were able to return.
Atlanta's largest private colleges will require COVID vaccinations for students returning to campus this fall. This includes Emory and the Atlanta University Center, which is home to the city's historically black colleges and universities.
Starting April 23rd, New Yorkers will be able to get their shots under the big blue whale in the Natural History Museum, and the vaccine will come with a free admission to the museum for a future visit.
The former sheriff's deputy accused of killing 3 people in Austin, Texas, is finally in custody after a one-day manhunt. Police say they arrested 41-year-old Stephen Broderick on Monday without incident. Authorities say they found him about 20 miles from the scene of Sunday's shooting, walking down a rural road with a loaded pistol in his waistband. He has been charged with capital murder in the shooting deaths of his ex-wife, adopted daughter, and her boyfriend. Prosecutors say he resigned from the force last year after being arrested on charges of sexual assault of a child.
Former President Trump is stepping back into the political spotlight, giving his first on-camera interview since leaving office. For more, let's get to our Capitol Hill correspondent, Tracy Potts. Tracy, as we might expect, he had plenty to say.
He did say a lot, Philip, and that was unusual. You know, this interview, it was wide-ranging from his resort, his Mar-a-Lago resort down in Florida. He talked about everything from immigration to vaccinations, and it was unusual because typically former presidents stay silent. They don't say a lot about their successors. In this case, not necessarily. Trump attacked President Biden for how he's handled migrants at the southern border. He was also candid about his own party, weighing in on the future of the GOP and his own future, whether he'd run again in 2024.
Should this now be the Republican Party agenda? Should anybody that wants to run for the House or the Senate, should they take this Make America Great agenda and fight for those things that you fought for the 4 years you were president?
If they want to win, yes. We've expanded the Republican Party. You've seen, I mean, the Texas border, we have the biggest Hispanic vote since, as the governor said to me, he called me up, great governor. He said, since Reconstruction. I said, you're talking about Civil War, right? He said, since Civil War. If you want to win and win big, you have to do that.
Are you running again in 2024?
I say this, I am looking at it very seriously, beyond seriously. From a legal standpoint, I don't want to really talk about it yet. It's a little too soon.
Trump did encourage Americans to get vaccinated, but he slammed the FDA's decision to put that Johnson & Johnson vaccine on hold, saying it was bad from bad PR. Philip?
All right, President Trump breaking that more than 3-month hiatus from on-camera interviews. Thank you, Tracy.
Breaking news overnight, former Vice President Walter Mondale has died at the age of 93. A champion of progressive causes, Mondale helped define the modern Democratic Party. First as a senator, then as vice president, serving under President Jimmy Carter. Carter paid tribute to Mondale last night, calling him the best vice president in our country's history. President Biden remembered his lifelong friend in a statement saying, in part, Mondale defined the vice presidency as a full partnership and helped provide a model for my service. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has a look back at his life.
Walter Mondale changed the face of American politics, shattering the glass ceiling by picking Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate in 1984.
I picked someone who I thought would make a superb vice president, or if necessary, a president.
When Mondale, nicknamed Fritz, ran for president, he'd been in Democratic politics for nearly 3 decades, including 12 years in the Senate and 4 as Jimmy Carter's vice president. In the primaries, Mondale battled Colorado Senator Gary Hart, who ran on new ideas. In a debate, Mondale fought back with a fast food chain's ad slogan.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef? Yeah.
The fall campaign against President Ronald Reagan was an uphill fight, challenging a popular incumbent at a time of peace and prosperity.
Mr. Reagan will raise taxes. And so will I. He won't tell you. I just did.
It was intended as candor, but was seen as a blunder. Mondale got a glimmer of hope when Reagan's age became an issue. In a debate, Reagan buried those doubts and Mondale's hopes.
I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Mondale lost in a historic landslide.
All of those states colored in blue are Ronald Reagan states.
He won only his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Though only in his 50s, Mondale became a party elder, serving as U.S. ambassador to Japan. But in 2002, Mondale replaced Minnesota Democratic Senator Paul Wellstone on the ballot after Wellstone was killed in a plane crash just 11 days before Election Day. He narrowly lost his last hurrah. Mondale's wife of 59 years, Joan, died in 2014. They had 2 sons and a daughter who died of brain cancer in 2011. Walter Fritz Mondale once said he loved public life and always looked for ways to serve. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News.
All right, if you live somewhere warm, good for you. Right now, we are going to talk about places where spring has not yet arrived. Meteorologist Janessa Webb joining us now, tracking those cold temperatures. Good morning, Janessa.
Good morning. Yes, exactly right, man. We just have not transitioned this April with warmer temperatures. We are well below average, and this morning we're just getting our first 0-degree reading with wind chills. And we're going to continue to be in the single digits for the upper Midwest, making its way to the Midwest, even Ohio Valley. The feel-like temperature this afternoon going to be sitting in the mid-20s. So that's why these freeze alerts, they continue to expand throughout the afternoon. I expect them to go into the Northeast with 51 million people currently impacted. That's a look at the big weather story of the day. Here's a closer look at your day ahead. So the colder air, it's going to stay in place throughout Thursday afternoon, and then we'll finally see a gradual warm up. A little bit of sunshine this afternoon for the upper Midwest, but then we'll start to track that snow for Cleveland all the way into New England. How much snow will we see? We'll talk about that forecast coming up.
That's the question. All right, Janessa will provide the answer. Thanks.
Fans of South Korean boy band BTS will soon be able to eat the group's favorite fast food meal. Next month, McDonald's is launching a BTS meal. It'll include a 10-piece chicken McNuggets, medium fries, and a medium Coke. There will also be sweet chili and Cajun dipping sauces, which will be available for the first time in America. The BTS meal hits the U.S. from May 26th through June 20th. Leading the news, 2 leaders of the far-right Proud Boys extremist group were ordered back to jail while awaiting trial on January 6th Capitol riot-related charges. Joseph Biggs and Ethan Nordine had been free since their indictment last month. A Trump-appointed U.S. district judge has ruled they're too dangerous, and there are no adequate conditions for their release.
A Colorado judge has agreed to resign after being censured by the state Supreme Court for racist behavior. Judge Natalie Chase, who is white, was a judge in the state's 18th Judicial District. Chase agreed to step down after disciplinary proceedings against her for racist behavior and workplace misconduct, as well as name-calling toward a fellow judge. Chase acknowledged repeatedly using the N-word in conversations with 2 court employees, one of whom was black. Her resignation will take effect on May 31st.
A memorial gate honoring slain soldier Vanessa Guillen was unveiled in Fort Hood. The Army specialist was killed last year. The gate contains a plaque commemorating Guillen with her photo. It leads to the 3rd Cavalry Regiment where she was served. Her death became a catalyst, changing the way the Army responds to sexual assault and harassment.
NASA engineers are celebrating this morning after an historic mission. The tiny helicopter Ingenuity made a huge leap for science on Mars. NBC's Tom Costello has the details.
Jubilation at JPL Mission Control. The images from Ingenuity, 180 million miles away, simply stunning. Video shot from the nearby rover captured the drone's entire 30-second flight, from liftoff to hovering at 10 feet to landing. Ingenuity's own camera even caught its shadow on the Martian surface. The challenges were huge. The Martian atmosphere is 99% thinner than Earth's, requiring 4 ultralight rotor blades.
This really is a Wright brothers moment. It's the start of a whole new kind of planetary exploration.
In their honor, Ingenuity carries a tiny piece of cloth from their 1903 plane. NASA named the landing zone Wright Brothers Field, complete with its own international airport code. 4 more chopper flights are planned, and someday aerial surveys of canyons, craters, and ice caps.
We are going to continually push all the way to the limit of this rotorcraft. We really want to push the rotorcraft flights to the limit and really learn and get information back from that.
A history-making day, a world away. Tom Costello, NBC News, back here on Earth.
Our world is facing some big challenges. Chuck Todd breaks them down. Every Thursday, a deep dive into a new topic.
Instead of covering all the big stories, we're going to cover one single subject impacting American politics.
Exploring and explaining the critical issues that affect our future. Meet the Press Reports. Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. Streaming on NBC News Now and available next day on demand on Peacock.
Good morning, I'm Joe Pryor.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, in the jury's hands, deliberations now underway in the Derek Chauvin murder trial after several hours of closing arguments. Highlights and analysis from Minneapolis as the city and the nation prepare for potential unrest. Frozen in time, tens of millions of unused coronavirus vaccines are sitting on freezer shelves. What the CDC is doing to get them out as soon as possible now that every U.S. adult is eligible for the shot. Farewell to Fritz. Well wishes and tributes are pouring in from around the world for former Vice President Walter Mondale, who passed away at age 93. How he transformed the West Wing into what it is today, and the history he made when running for president. And the new radio, more people turning to TikTok for their tunes. More on the growing trend that's shaking up the music industry. Actually a pretty cool story. Lots of people getting these big record deals and all this kind of stuff after being on TikTok.
I think it's funny. Everything's like the new radio. The podcasts, they're the new radio. Like yearning to have radio again.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to that a little bit later, but we begin once again in Minneapolis as the nation awaits a verdict in the murder trial of ex-officer Derek Chauvin following the death of George Floyd.
The jury deliberated for 4 hours yesterday following several hours of closing arguments from both the prosecution and defense. The 12 jurors must now reach a unanimous verdict in each of the 3 charges against Chauvin: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter.
All this as protesters took to the streets for another night of demonstrations. Many of them cautiously optimistic the jury will find Chauvin guilty.
I am hopeful. It's scary that it only takes one juror.
I don't have a ton of hope.
I don't have much faith in this system. However, I am optimistic.
Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster, who's been monitoring all the new developments there in Minneapolis for weeks now. Shaq, thank you for being with us. Good morning. Now, the fate of Derek Chauvin is now in the hands of a jury after several hours worth of closing arguments. What were the key takeaways from both sides in those arguments?
Well, the prosecution began their closing arguments by saying his name was George Perry Floyd Jr. They talked about him as a person who was loved and a person who died under the knee of ex-officer Derek Chauvin. They accused Derek Chauvin of applying excessive force to George Floyd and leading to that death by asphyxiation. And that is how they framed their entire arguments as they went through the key pieces of the testimony. For the defense, they said there's just simply too much doubt in this case. They used the phrase reasonable police officer more than 100 times, painting Derek Chauvin's actions as maybe not or as unattractive, but very reasonable. I want you to listen to some of the highlights from the closing arguments yesterday.
This is not a prosecution of the police. It is a prosecution of the defendant. What the defendant did was not policing. What the defendant did was an assault. Use your common sense. Believe your eyes. What you saw, you saw.
I submit to you that the state has failed to meet its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to be convinced that the defendant's actions caused the death of Mr. Floyd. Actions that happened before Mr. Floyd was arrested that had nothing to do with Officer Chauvin's activities are not the natural consequences of the defendant's actions. The drug ingestion, right? The bad heart, the diseased heart, the hypertension. All of these things existed before Mr. Chauvin arrived.
You were told, for example, that Mr. Floyd died because his heart was too big. You heard that testimony. And now, having seen all the evidence, having heard all the evidence, you know the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the reason George Floyd is dead is because Mr. Chauvin's heart was too small.
Now, also important, yesterday we saw the judge read those jury instructions before sending the jury on their way. He actually started the day with it and then gave them another reminder right before they left. Those are the specific instructions that tell the jury what the law is and how they should apply the law as they go ahead and start deliberating. We know they deliberated about 4 hours yesterday, and those deliberations will pick up later this morning.
Now, Shaq, we know the jury was not sequestered during the trial, but they will be sequestered throughout deliberations. That means no phone, no internet, no TV, or any other outside influences. Remind us who these jurors are and how this deliberation process works.
That's right. They will be sequestered until they reach that unanimous verdict. And what we know about them, we know that 7 of them are women. 2 were dismissed yesterday, so it brought that total down to 7 women, 5 men in the total 12 jurors that are there. In terms of the racial breakdown, we know that 6 are white, 4 are black, 2 self-identify as mixed race. We know from their professions, it's a range of professions. We know that some are, one was an auditor, another was a nurse, someone was an accountant. Their ages range from mid-20s to 60s. So it's a pretty diverse group of people. It's when you talk to folks who are in the legal profession here in Hennepin County, they note that it's more diverse and it's a little younger than you normally see in a jury pool there. But you know, this is a group of people that now will determine the fate of ex-officer Derek Chauvin and will be locked away doing that until they reach that unanimous verdict.
Hey, Shaq, you were in this city right after George Floyd's death. You were in this city as protests erupted there and around the world in reaction to George Floyd's death. And now you've been in Minneapolis covering this trial for several weeks. We know the city is preparing for possible unrest ahead of a verdict. I know it feels kind of like a collective holding of breath right now. Talk to us just about what it feels like to be there right now in the city and as somebody who has watched this unfold on the front lines now for a year.
I'll say that sound that you played right before you introduced me of the people at the protest and that demonstration yesterday, that is what you hear as you go through Minneapolis, as you talk to people here, as I reconnect with people who I talked to right after George Floyd died. It's this idea that they know the trial is happening. It's very clear. Not only is there the barbed wire and the military vehicles that you see around me in the downtown area, but in the past week, that has expanded to all across this city. There was a story in the Star Tribune yesterday talking about how on people's commute to work, they're passing military vehicles and it just makes them feel uneasy. They see boarded up windows in buildings all across the city. So there is definitely that tension there. More than 3,000 National Guard members are fully activated. Yesterday, the governor asked for help from the state of Ohio and Nebraska so more law enforcement officers can come down to this Twin City area. This is definitely something that is all consuming for people living here, and it's going to be that way until we get that verdict and probably a little bit after that.
All right, Shaq, thank you so much. Controversy is growing over comments made by a congresswoman about the Chauvin murder trial. Now, Judge Cahill says it could be grounds for an appeal by the defense.
I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function.
I want to bring in NBC News legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, good morning. Now, that was in reference to Congresswoman Maxine Waters' comments that protesters need to get more confrontational if there's no guilty verdict in this trial. And what we just heard there from the judge was actually in response to Chauvin's lawyer even asking for a mistrial to be declared over Waters' statements. Explain what's going on here and how this could affect the case.
You know, in the long run, I don't think it will affect the case. You could see Judge Cahill's frustration sort of boiling over a little bit, and I don't blame him because it's his job to give the defendant, Derek Chauvin, a fair trial without any outside influence from members of Congress or anybody. You know, it's also Judge Cahill's job to give the prosecutors a fair trial. I was a career prosecutor, and we don't technically represent anybody, but we do represent the interests of the people. And these prosecutors were representing the interests of the people of Minneapolis. So you could see that he has really worked mightily to try to make sure both parties got a fair trial. And I'm sure it was frustrating when you see a congresswoman say the kind of things Representative Waters said. It also is not unusual. Millions of people are talking about this case and the consequences of one verdict or another in this case. But here's what's most important to take away. If the judge believed Representative Waters' comments had any impact on the trial, he would have taken that up. He could have even held an evidentiary hearing, and he could have granted relief if he thought the trial was impacted. So I think it was nothing more than frustration when he said, you may have an appellate issue, because if there was a legitimate legal issue, the judge would have wrestled with it right then and there. So I actually do not think there will be any appreciable appellate issue in the event of conviction.
That is a great point. Great context there. Now, Glenn, a moment ago, we also heard some of the highlights from yesterday's closing arguments. Do you think each side was able to get their point across? How strong were they?
I think given what we saw out of the performances of the prosecutors and the defense attorney during the course of the trial, the closing arguments went pretty much as expected. Steve Schleicher gave a professional, thorough closing argument. He had some really, I think, nice imagery and some nice rhetorical flourishes. He hit all the nuts and bolts of the evidence. But when he said things like the pavement beneath George Floyd was as unyielding as were the men on top of George Floyd pushing him down. Those were important images, I think, for the jury to sort of to take back with them into the deliberation room. I do think the defense attorney lost a real opportunity because what Eric Nelson settled on was to call the testimony of 5 medical expert witnesses for the prosecution, and I'll use his word, preposterous, because they disagreed with his conclusion. The reason I say it was an opportunity lost is because what he had to work with was Dr. Baker's testimony. Dr. Baker was the only one who performed the autopsy, who had a first-hand impression of the injuries to George Floyd's body or the absence of injuries. So he should have argued, in my estimation, that Dr. Baker did not say he died of an asphyxial death. He did not say he died of low oxygen. He could have made those findings, but he didn't. Now let's talk about why that exonerates Derek Chauvin. He didn't have to insult all of the prosecution's medical experts, many of whom were very likable and compelling, like Dr. Tobin, and he didn't have to insult the common sense of the jurors. So I think for the defense, it was a bit of an opportunity lost.
Now, Glenn, we know that we're awaiting this verdict on 3 charges here, 2nd and 3rd degree murder and 2nd degree manslaughter. 2 questions here for you. How do you think it's going to go for the jury? Is this difficult to come to a unanimous verdict on these charges? And then I'm also wondering, as a former prosecutor yourself, what this period's like in waiting for prosecution.
Yeah, so first of all, I had plenty of hung juries with 11 jurors voting to convict and 1 juror holding out for not guilty, for acquittal. That's very frustrating. It's most frustrating for the family in a homicide case, but it's equally frustrating for prosecutors. I've always said it's hard to get 12 strangers to agree unanimously on anything, like where to have lunch, for example. But when you're asking them to make this most consequential decision regarding the life of a fellow human being, it's tough. But you know what? Juries reach unanimous verdicts every day. And I think given the strength of the evidence, if I had to predict, I would say they're going to convict him on all 3 counts, including the most serious count of 2nd degree murder.
Glenn, thank you so much. Very important context for us there.
As the country braces for a verdict in the Chauvin trial, the White House has spent weeks weighing how it will respond. Administration officials have told NBC News that President Biden is preparing to deliver a statement once the verdict is in. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joined. Good morning to you. So how has the White House been planning, and do we know what the president's words to the nation will focus on?
Well, Joe, President Biden has a full schedule this week. Just today, he's meeting with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. He's also virtually touring an electric battery plant in South Carolina. But make no mistake about it, this administration has been making plans for a week about how to deal with a verdict if and when it comes. Take a listen to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki talking about this yesterday.
We're in touch with local authorities. We're in touch with states, with governors, with mayors, and certainly, we will continue to encourage peaceful protests, but we're not going to get ahead of the verdict in the trial.
And Joe, just in the last few moments, we learned a little bit more, which is George Floyd's brother saying to our colleagues on the Today Show that President Biden actually called the family yesterday. He said that President Biden knows what it's like to lose a member of the family. He said he's praying for the family and that he hopes everything turns out okay.
We remember he attended George Floyd, visited with the family last year around the time of the funeral, too. Now, Mike, another thing I want to ask you about later this week, the president will be holding a big climate summit with world leaders, virtually, of course. What will be his main goal for this?
This summit was an idea that President Biden proposed in the campaign. He said he wanted to bring all the countries that were part of the Paris Climate Accord back to the table to talk about ways in which they would up the ante. Well, significantly, we know the big players here are going to be the United States and China, and leaders from those countries, including John Kerry, spoke over the weekend, pledged their commitment to increasing their goals for what they're doing to lower carbon emissions. Michael Regan, the EPA administrator, spoke with Al Roker yesterday, wouldn't get ahead of the president's announcement about what the United States is willing to put on the table. He said he doesn't want to lose his new job just yet.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Some sad news this morning. Former Vice President Walter Mondale has died at the age of 93. He represented Minnesota in the United States Senate before serving alongside President Jimmy Carter in the White House. Although he never fulfilled his dream of winning the presidency, he continued his lifelong devotion to public service. Former President Carter said in a statement Monday night, "Today I mourn the passing of my dear friend, Walter Mondale, who I consider the best vice president in our country's history." President Joe Biden worked with Mr. Mondale in a tribute with the First Lady. He said, "When I arrived in the United States Senate in 1973, Walter Mondale was one of the first people to greet me. Through his work as a senator, he showed me what was possible." Before his death, Mr. Mondale wrote a letter thanking his team, saying he knew his time had come and that he was eager to join his late wife and daughter. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has the story.
Walter Mondale changed the face of American politics, shattering the glass ceiling by picking Geraldine Ferraro as his running mate in 1984.
I picked someone who I thought would make a superb vice president, or if necessary, a president.
When Mondale, nicknamed Fritz, ran for president, he'd been in Democratic politics for nearly 3 decades, including 12 years in the Senate and 4 as Jimmy Carter's vice president. In the primaries, Mondale battled Colorado Senator Gary Hart, who ran on new ideas. In a debate, Mondale fought back with a fast food chain's ad slogan.
When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad. Where's the beef?
The fall campaign against President Ronald Reagan was an uphill fight, challenging a popular incumbent at a time of peace and prosperity.
Mr. Reagan will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did.
It was intended as candor, but was seen as a blunder. Mondale got a glimmer of hope when Reagan's age became an issue. In a debate, Reagan buried those doubts and Mondale's hopes.
I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Mondale lost in a historic landslide.
All of those states colored in blue are Ronald Reagan states.
He won only his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Though only in his 50s, Mondale became a party elder, serving as U.S. ambassador to Japan. But in 2002, Mondale replaced Minnesota Democratic Senator Paul Wellstone on the ballot after Wellstone was killed in a plane crash just 11 days before Election Day. He narrowly lost his last hurrah. Mondale's wife of 59 years, Joan, died in 2014. They had 2 sons and a daughter who died of brain cancer in 2011. Walter Fritz Mondale once said he loved public life and always looked for ways to serve. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News.
You know, speaking to friends and family back home in Minnesota, it's very emotional there right now as everyone waits for the Derek Chauvin verdict. And now comes this. And it's hard because no matter what your political views were, Walter Mondale, along with his mentor, Hubert Humphrey, really defined Minnesota politics. And so this is really emotional for a lot of people to see the end of this era. His wife, Joan, was also well known. She passed away a few years ago. And I actually knew his daughter, Eleanor. She was a TV radio host. She was well known in the area. You see her on the left there. And I actually went to her home in 2008 and interviewed her on the day that she announced that her brain cancer had returned. And sadly, she did pass away a few years later. So a family that was always in the public eye in Minnesota, very well known and with a wonderful legacy.
Absolutely. It was something to see in that note that he wrote to his staff that he was eager to join both his wife and his daughter. Super emotional and just, I mean, what an incredible man, the way that he completely revamped the office of the vice presidency, bringing it to the West Wing. Like you said, quite the legacy.
Absolutely. Moving on now. The nation is jumping over an important hurdle this week in the race against the coronavirus. Now, everyone older than 16 is eligible for the vaccine. Right now, the CDC says nearly 53 million doses are sitting on freezer shelves ready to be used. NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez joins us now to walk through the biggest pandemic headlines. So, Isa, the nationwide vaccination effort has reached a new stage. No more confusing rules about who can get the shot and who can't. The challenge really now seems to be convincing people to get the shot. What is the CDC doing to try and get those tens of millions of unused doses into arms?
Hey, Joe. So the CDC is really trying to get the message across to Americans right now that the infrastructure is there, the vaccine appointments are there, and the data is there for them to, as Dr. Fauci said at the White House yesterday, to do their homework to decide whether or not, based on the data, they're ready to get vaccinated. Now, some of the biggest slowdowns that we're seeing as far as vaccination rates when we look across the country are in states with large rural populations, places like Wyoming, Montana, Mississippi, West Virginia. And as we look at vaccine hesitancy across the country, we do know that that is declining. However, still about 17% of Americans say that they want to wait and see whether or not they're comfortable getting the vaccine. That percentage rises when we look among Black Americans to about 24%, and it goes even higher according to recent polls when we look at men, GOP men. So some polls show that over 40% of Republican men are hesitant to get the vaccine. And just as recently as earlier this month, that included a few GOP senators as well. Joe?
Now, Isa, the State Department plans to expand its travel advisories, which means a big hike in the number of countries labeled do not travel. What more can you tell us about those changes?
Joe, the State Department is saying that it plans on boosting that list of do not travel countries to 80% of countries worldwide. So right now they have 34 countries on that list. That includes countries like Chad, Haiti, Brazil, Argentina, and others. In order to get to that 80%, they're expected to add about 130 countries to that list. And they're citing unprecedented risk to travelers due to the pandemic, due to COVID-19. Now, at this point, the White House has not given a timeline on when those restrictions are expected to be lifted. Joe?
Isa, thank you so much. And while we're talking about international travel, let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
NBC News correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us now from Rome. Hi, Claudio. Good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. Well, with 273,000 new cases reported on Monday, India is confirmed to be the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic right now in the world. Now, a week-long lockdown has been imposed in the capital, New Delhi, where 1 out of 3 people now are testing positive, and with 15 million overall infections since the start of the pandemic, well, India is now confirmed to be the second worst affected country in the world after the US. Now, Savannah, this one is for you. I know you're a big fan of Arsenal, and Arsenal is one of the teams that have joined other big soccer teams in Europe to start this, what they call a Super League. I don't know what you think about that, but I'll tell you what politicians think about that here in Italy, here in Europe. In Italy, the Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, said that he opposes the idea of a Super League because it goes against meritocracy and against the spirit of the sport. And in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that his government will do everything it can to make sure that their plan does not go ahead. But it's not only soccer as we know it that is under threat. Coffee also apparently is under threat from climate change, because there is a study that suggests that by 2050, a lot of the land, about half of the land that is being used to grow high-quality Arabica coffee may become unproductive because of rising temperatures. But no need to worry there as well, because scientists appear to have the solution. They said that they rediscovered a coffee plant in West Africa that resists higher temperatures, and it is as good as high-quality Arabica coffee, guys.
Phew, that would have been bad news for 2 morning show anchors.
It is a big concern, though.
Yeah.
I've done stories on a place.
And for me, too.
Yeah.
I live on coffee.
It is a concern. And to be fair, I'm not the huge soccer fan. I don't know that much. It's my boyfriend, but he is a huge Arsenal fan, so I've read in a little.
Well, ask him.
Yeah. Claudio, thanks so much.
Time to get a check on your morning News Now weather. Hopefully it's a little less angry today.
Yeah. Bill Cairns is back. Hopefully in a better mood.
I have a great attitude today. I've turned the corner. Life is good. So let's talk about all the great things going on right now. The kids are so excited in Denver. 5 inches of snow on the ground, running around, rolling in it, sledding. Boulder's got 8 inches of snow. It's snowing this morning in Kansas City. I heard reports people running around catching snowflakes in their mouth. What a great time in the middle of April in Missouri right now with the snow falling. So that's the, so additional snow. I mean, we may even give you a little more in Colorado, I mean, just to add to your glory. And then as we go throughout the rest of the day, the snow will move into areas like Indiana, northern Ohio, Detroit, Cleveland, Erie, and Buffalo. Make your plan to get out there and play in that wonderful white stuff here on this third week of April and even portions of northern New England. So the forecast today, let's forget about the 75 and sunny in D.C. and New York. I mean, that's the simple stuff that anyone can appreciate the beautiful weather on the East Coast today. Let's get into that gorgeous weather in the middle of the country with the falling temperatures. Grab your jacket, your gloves, and your hats because winter has returned. How fantastic of a forecast is that?
Wow. That is
downright perky, Bill.
Thanks for turning it around for us. We'll see you in a little bit.
Yeah. Coming up, the factory that botched millions of COVID vaccine doses is now being asked to pause production.
The reason behind the FDA's decision and what this means for Johnson & Johnson next.
Planned for the end of the world. Death followed in her wake, and her children went missing. Mommy Doomsday, the Dateline podcast.
It has to be heard to be believed.
Listen to all episodes now.
Get more of everything you love about today, now all day.
Woo!
Talk with friends all day.
Oh, man.
Feel good stories.
Kiss the bride.
All day. Chef secrets all day.
Salute.
Now, there's more today to love.
Welcome to Today All Day.
Get more extended interviews.
That's impressive, Chef.
More solutions.
Does it have to say antibacterial?
More must-see moments all day. So join us today, all day. Stream for free on today.com and Peacock.
Need your true crime fix on the go? Dateline episodes are available as podcasts. Mysteries with a twist from the True Crime Original.
Wow.
Listen to Dateline wherever you get your podcasts.
Right now on NBC News Now.
Here in Chicago, about 20,000 middle schoolers returning to school today.
They also took advantage of existing vaccine distribution networks throughout Alaska.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
Are we vaccinating right now to keep ahead of these mutant strains?
We still have a demand that far exceeds supply.
He's the first African-American crew member on an extended mission on the International Space Station.
To be able to see someone that looks like them, that is super important.
Perhaps the most successful gospel artist today.
Where you're going is a lot bigger than where you've been.
I am looking forward to seeing you in Tokyo.
Thank you today, show family. Love you guys.
You're back.
The Food and Drug Administration has asked Emergent Biosolutions to pause its manufacturing of COVID vaccines. This is while the agency investigates its plant in Baltimore responsible for ruining millions of Johnson & Johnson shots late last month.
That shot, of course, now on a pause across the country after 6 cases of rare blood clots potentially linked to the vaccine. We're still waiting on the FDA's decision on future redistribution of the shot. NBC News correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now. Ali, good morning. Now, walk us through the FDA's decision to ask Emergent to stop producing vaccines altogether.
Yeah, Savannah, I think it's really important, too, that we focus on the 2 issues that are happening here that are pretty separate. There's the larger question of use and dissemination of this J&J vaccine. You touched on why there's a pause on that right now nationwide, and that's because of that issue with rare blood clots. And then here specifically, we're focusing on the manufacturing at this plant, a subcontractor for Johnson & Johnson. And I think it's really helpful to just walk through the timeline here. You start at the end of March when we first find out from a report in the New York Times that millions of doses of the vaccine were botched here at this plant behind me because of a mix-up in ingredients. At this point, this plant was manufacturing both the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Then you fast forward to April 3rd, where the Biden administration, frustrated, they put J&J in charge of this plant. This plant then stops manufacturing the AstraZeneca vaccine. They just start focusing on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And then last week, April 12th, we find out the FDA inspected this plant. And then a few days later, we're talking Friday, April 16th, we find out that this plant has been asked to pause production of the J&J vaccine and to quarantine anything that they may have made in the meantime. So this is coming against the backdrop of the larger issue of use of the J&J vaccine nationwide. But this specifically here, we're talking about manufacturing at this one plant.
So, Ali, thank you. That's an important distinction there. Let's talk a little bit more about the broader impact here, J&J in general being on pause. The CFO of Johnson & Johnson was on CNBC this morning. What did he say about the company's outlook right now?
There's a really important thing that's happening here because there are contracts to make 100 million doses of the J&J single-dose vaccine by the end of May. I was struck because in a statement that the company put out last night after this FDA pause of this plant that we're at today, I want to show you a little bit of that statement because Johnson & Johnson says at this time, it's premature to speculate on any potential impacts this plant's closure could have on the timing of our vaccine deliveries. They go on to say that they remain committed to delivering 100 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine to the government and helping bring an end to this global pandemic. But not in that statement was that end of May deadline. They had reiterated it in previous moments. They did not reiterate it here. But listen to what their CFO said when he was pressed on this just a few minutes ago on CNBC. Effectively there, Savannah, in that interview, he says that he's confident that they'll be able to get these 100 million doses. I didn't hear the word may in that interview. At the same time, though, these are contracts, and so this does present a roadblock, but they do need to get as many millions of these doses as they can on the timeline that they laid out with the U.S. government. I would also say on this other larger issue of whether use of this vaccine can come into play nationwide, Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that we're going to likely hear a decision on that as early as Friday from the FDA and the CDC. The CFO of J&J was also asked about that, and he said that he hopes that by the end of this process, Americans can feel confident about the vaccine because it has gone through all of the steps of the process that's laid out for if there is a problem, then it's mitigated. We could see potentially restrictions put on this vaccine if it's put back into use, or just disclaimers put on the label about potential side effects.
Ali, thank you for rolling with that. He also said we are certainly going to do our part to make sure we have a favorable outcome there, deliver in the U.S. and around the globe. Ali, thank you so much. We missed you while you've been working on your book, and I am loving the blonde, girl. Good to see you.
So glad to be back. Thank you.
Let's bring in Dr. Ali Raja. He's the Executive Vice Chair of Emergency Medicine at Massachusetts General and an Associate Professor at Harvard Medical School. So, Doctor, let's talk about what's happening at the Emergent plant there. Even if the J&J vaccine gets the okay to resume, are you worried at all that pausing production at the Emergent plant could have an impact?
Joe, I really am. Even if they get the go-ahead to resume giving the J&J vaccine, which I'm really hopeful that they do, shutting down this plant, which was producing a lot of vaccine, is definitely going to have an impact. But here's the thing. I agree with the reason for shutting it down. We need people to trust in these vaccines. As Ali just said, we need Americans to feel confident. So if pausing inspires confidence that we're doing the right thing, then it's the right way for us to go.
Now, the CDC director said yesterday that they're looking at a handful of cases of possible severe side effects from the J&J vaccine, in addition to those 6 blood clot cases previously reported. What's your reaction to that news?
Joe, I'm not surprised. We all knew that there would be some more cases like this coming to light. That's why the CDC panel is taking an extra week. There have been millions and millions and millions of doses of the J&J vaccine. We're going to see some new cases of the blood clots coming. But I still hope that we're going to be able to get the J&J vaccine out to most people again, hopefully within the next week or so.
Dr. Raja, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
New details are being revealed about the 19-year-old alleged gunman who shot and killed 8 people at a FedEx facility in Indianapolis last week. His past mental state is spurring calls to strengthen the state's red flag law, a process aimed at preventing such attacks. Here's NBC News correspondent Katie Beck with more.
Well, Savannah and Joe, investigators are still facing many unanswered questions in this case, and now facing new questions about the gunman's past and how he was able to legally obtain 2 assault rifles. The shock of mass violence in Indianapolis absorbed by those left behind. Now gatherings to grieve.
It's very healing for me to be here.
Support and solidarity mourning the 5 women and 3 men who showed up to work at the FedEx facility Thursday and never returned home. New questions after investigators confirmed the gunman legally purchased the 2 assault rifles used in the shooting.
The system failed our state. We have a red flag law, but it's very weak. It could be much stronger.
Prosecutors say the gunman was given a mental health evaluation in March of 2020 after police detained him based on suicide threats and a shotgun was confiscated from his home.
We did not file a follow-up petition because we had already achieved our objective, which was to prevent that firearm from going back to this particular individual.
Investigators say there wasn't significant evidence to red flag the suspect through a court process. Still, prosecutors say the Indiana law should be stronger, allowing more time to investigate and fast access to a suspect's mental health file.
I think people hear red flag and they think it's the panacea to all these issues. It's not. What it is a good start where there's a number of loopholes.
Healing from tragedy, calling for change to prevent another. And now many in the community are calling for the closure of the loopholes in the red flag laws, especially those in the Sikh community, from where half of the victims were members. Savannah and Joe.
Coming up, an exclusive look inside an electric car battery mega factory.
That's part of our week-long series focused on the climate challenge. Up next.
Planned for the end of the world. Death followed in her wake, and her children went missing. Mommy Doomsday, the Dateline podcast.
It has to be heard to be believed.
Listen to all episodes now.
Get more of everything you love about today, now all day.
Woo!
Talk with friends all day.
Oh, man.
Feel good stories.
Kiss the bride.
All day. Chef secrets all day.
Salute.
Now, there's more today to love.
Welcome to Today All Day.
Get more extended interviews.
That's impressive, Jennifer.
More solutions.
Does it have to say antibacterial?
More must-see moments all day. So join us today, all day. Stream for free on today.com and Peacock.
Need your true crime fix on the go? Dateline episodes are available as podcasts. Mysteries with a twist from the True Crime Original.
Wow.
Listen to Dateline wherever you get your podcasts.
Right now on NBC News Now.
Here in Chicago, about 20,000 middle schoolers returning to school today.
They also took advantage of existing vaccine distribution networks throughout Alaska.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
Are we vaccinating right now to keep ahead of these mutant strains?
We still have a demand that far exceeds supply.
He's the first African-American crew member on an extended mission on the International Space Station.
To be able to see someone that looks like them, that is super important.
Perhaps the most successful gospel artist today.
Where you're going is a lot bigger than where you've been.
I am looking forward to seeing you in Tokyo.
Thank you, Today Show family. Love you guys.
You're back.
On a busy news morning, here is one story that might catch your eye. It's hard to believe that over a year ago, the world was introduced to the likes of Joe Exotic, Carole Baskin, and all of their big cats on the Netflix series Tiger King, Murder, Mayhem, and Madness. Well, now a limited series will tell the story of the relationship between Exotic and his archenemy Baskin. We now know that John Cameron Mitchell will star as the show's title character, Joe Exotic, opposite Kate McKinnon. Now, in a statement, Mitchell said, "I'm thrilled to take on the role of this modern folk anti-hero." The limited series is set to air across our parent company, NBC Universal's television and streaming platforms. This is very cool. I've known Mitchell since his Hedwig and the Angry Inch days, a character he created that's become rather iconic. So it'll be interesting to see what he does with Joe Exotic.
And I'm very excited about Kate McKinnon. She is talented, so I can't wait to see that.
It'll be good.
It will. Thanks, Joe. Now, from Hurricane Harvey to the winter freeze that brought down its power grid, Houston's critical infrastructure has been pushed to the brink by extreme weather events in recent years. It's a warning for the rest of the nation to be on the lookout as the climate continues to evolve. NBC's Lester Holt reports from Houston.
Savannah and Joe, we're here in Houston to begin NBC News cross-platform coverage of the climate challenges we face. And while it was warm and pleasant here, a series of extreme weather events in the region in recent years have left a lingering chill about its future. It broke virtually every rainfall record in U.S. history. 4 years ago, Hurricane Harvey washing away nearly everything in the Beal family's home.
Water was everywhere.
In the house?
In the house, coming from up under the house, coming from a roof.
The family of 6 was still rebuilding from that catastrophic storm. Then came February's crippling freeze. Their pipes burst. For days, they had no power, no water. They had to move out again. What was that storm like?
It was terrible. It was painful.
How cold did it get?
Probably about 5 degrees in there.
Extreme weather from those hurricanes and winter storms in Texas to California's heat wave last summer that led to rolling blackouts, growing more frequent and severe.
And that has revealed vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure. Here in Texas, the power grid failed during the deadly cold snap in February. People were trying to heat their homes. Plants couldn't keep up. And that, say experts, should be a warning to the rest of the country.
If we do nothing, then it looks like climate change is going to get inexorably worse.
Cheryl LaFleur is the former chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She says we must put the work in to build more reliable and resilient power grids.
It's really a double strategy. We need to fight climate change. At the same time, we need to be ready for storms because we can't make everything perfect tomorrow.
She points to possible solutions, like building better connections between power grids so energy can be diverted when an area sees a spike in demand. And she says power plants need to be modified so they're better prepared to withstand all kinds of weather. After more than 100 people died in the February storm, some officials here in Texas are pushing to winterize the system so natural gas, coal, and nuclear plants stay online, and renewable energy sources like wind turbines don't freeze again.
What happened in 2021, quite frankly, in large part was foreseeable and preventable.
Sylvester Turner is Houston's mayor.
So if we do nothing, what happens to a city like Houston?
If you don't do anything, then you're going to repeat this movie over and over again. And it's going to cost in terms of people losing their lives, people losing their property, and it's going to affect the overall economy.
Meanwhile, Craig and Angela Beal are still rebuilding and bracing for Houston's scorching summer when the grid could be tested again.
Do you think this is going to happen again?
Yes.
I know it's going to happen again.
I believe it's going to get worse. As the years go by, it gets worse.
Extreme weather is just one of many climate challenges we face. As part of our cross-platform series on the climate challenge this morning, we're also taking a look at the global race toward electric vehicles. NBC News has an exclusive look inside what is expected to be one of the largest electric vehicle battery factories in the country. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from Lordstown, Ohio, outside that sprawling mega factory, which is now under construction and set to open next year. Josh, good morning. So this plant will build nothing but batteries for electric cars and trucks. Tell us, why is that so important, and how will this plant help the U.S. land on the global map when it comes to electric vehicles?
Right now, Joe, we don't really make a whole lot of electric vehicle batteries here in the United States. They're mostly made overseas and imported, even for cars that are sold here in the U.S. And so this is really an effort to change that. And you see GM and LG building not only this plant, but another one in Tennessee. Inside, we got a chance to look at it yesterday. It's going to be a little bit more like the kind of factory that would build computer parts than an actual auto plant. Take a listen to the way Tom Gallagher, the chief operating officer for the plant, described it while we were inside. How different does this look than a traditional auto factory?
Oh, quite different. It's all high-tech equipment, computer-driven. There's no material movement or lifting by people. It's all by automation and handling. So as an operator, quite different task.
GM says that the batteries that are going to be built in this factory behind me will have a range of up to 400 miles. They'll also be able to go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, Joe.
Now, Josh, President Biden's massive infrastructure plan does include $174 billion to promote electric vehicles, but Americans haven't exactly embraced them. So what are the challenges here when trying to convince Americans?
Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing because we haven't had a lot of electric vehicles in the U.S., so we haven't built out charging stations across the country like automakers say that we need to. We haven't built the supply chains up here in the U.S. to actually make them domestically. And consumers are concerned about a lack of cheap options for affordable electric vehicles, as well as sometimes a lack of diversity of types of vehicles. Take a listen to what Ki-un, the president of Ultium Cells building this factory, told me about those concerns.
There isn't any concern about the performance and then price. I think we are entering into the generation where this huge transformation is happening. So we have no concern about demand in the market at all.
And in fact, automakers are working to diversify the range of offers that will be available to consumers. In fact, the batteries that are going to be made here will be going into, among other things, Cadillacs and electric Hummers.
And quickly, Josh, President Biden is planning to virtually tour another electric battery facility this afternoon in South Carolina. What's his message expected to be there?
I think you'll expect to see President Biden talking about the critical role in reducing tailpipe emissions from cars and vehicles. Transportation makes up about 29% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. The Biden administration working to bring that down, Joe.
All right. Josh Letterman, thank you so much.
Coming up, it's not just a video app. TikTok is influencing our airwaves.
How Gen Z's favorite social media website is becoming one of the top ways to find new music. Next.
Right now on Morning News Now, we begin with the dawn of a new day in Washington.
Mr. President, you've been aspiring to this office for your whole career.
We're looking at vaccination manufacturing to nearly double over the course of the next month.
I just want to show you what's happening right now. They're making their way up the steps of the U.S. Capitol.
Our team of correspondents is here.
Tonight, the accelerated vaccination timetable as more states lift COVID restrictions. Is it your expectation that you can adapt to any variants out there? The president is talking about winning over some Republicans. Where might he compromise? Is there a chance people could be dealing with long-lasting symptoms for the rest of their lives? Those delivering kindness while fighting hunger in this pandemic.
How are you today?
Very grateful, believe me.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
You're watching NBC News Now.
The pace is accelerating to get vaccine doses into arms.
The hope is using advanced robotics to try to scale up to doing thousands of samples.
Parler, the alternative social media platform that's drawn conservatives but also far-right extremists, is available again in the Apple App Store after it was banned in the days following the January 6 Capitol Hill riot. Insurrectionists used the application to communicate before and during the siege. NBC News technology reporter Ben Collins joins us now. Ben, good morning. Now, Apple CEO Tim Cook had said it was, quote, straightforward decision to ban Parler because they weren't adhering to the guidelines of the App Store. So what's changed? Are they back because now they are, in fact, following those rules?
You know, they had a huge change of heart after they lost a large portion of their business over the last few months. They weren't available on the Apple App Store for the last few months, and their user base completely plummeted. There was not much left there. Unless you had downloaded the app before the 8th of January, you weren't really allowed to be on that website from an Apple device. So, you know, they had to play by the rules. They had to get rid of all the Nazi glorification. They had to get rid of all the death threats. And that's what they decided to do. They are playing, they're playing ball with Apple now, basically.
Interesting. I think really we'll know the answer to this question specifically tomorrow night when the protests happen as to whether or not the story of his treatment in prison, of his declining health, is going to result in more people showing up than those last protests, which were record setters, or if this story is already kind of fading from a lot of people's minds. So, you know, the opposition is kind of billing tomorrow's event as a make or break moment, and I think that's an accurate characterization of it.
All right, Matt, we know you'll stay on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're tracking hundreds of millions of vaccine doses.
Our very own Steve Kornacki will join us to walk through the numbers up next.